Well, welcome. Good to have you here, Albert, and good to have everyone joining us from wherever you are in the world. We're talking about generational friction today. Yeah, we're talking
Yeah,
about how we can start to facilitate it, not fear it. And that's an incredibly important, relevant topic. We've got four generations, soon to be five different generations in the workplace here in Australia. The US is following suit. A lot of Western economies are going to be following suit. Indonesia is probably focusing, seeing something probably similar.
yeah,
I really look forward to unpacking that with you. And today we're going to spend 45 minutes to an hour really focusing on a couple of key areas.
mm,
The first one will be how do we start to facilitate it as leaders and not fear it? How do we create the conditions, the environments, the relationships to be able to do that? And then we're also going to look to, and you made a really great point in our lead up to this conversation, how do we start to challenge that generational bias that we have, right? And that we can hold about each other because the world is evolving. We
yeah,
don't all fit nice, neat boxes and generational, definitions and understanding. So
yes,
we've got a lot. This is the first conversation that we're really having on this that links back to the discussions and the work we're doing around that circular workplace.
agree on that.
But I think that's the beauty of this conversation is that as we're discussing it, we're finding solutions to it. And that's critical because we can't keep talking about the problem without saying, well, then how do we lay some rubber on the road here and
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
move the dial? So you and I are going to be speaking about some real world observations, the tactics and some of the strategies that we've used as well, and what we're working on here that people can also start to adopt and build that capability in a way that is just smart moving forward as well too.
yeah,
So
agree.
let's talk. And I'm going to bring up the diagram when we get to this point, but there's a bit we want to unpack first before we get there. And I'm going to throw open to you in a minute. But I first want to talk about this is not just about people development. Obviously, that's a critical part of it.
Mm,
But it's also about de-risking the risk to the organisation as well, right? As much
yeah,
as it is to the people.
yes,
And there's some key things that I just want to touch on before I throw over to you. And I think it'd be fair to say that generational friction, we don't always see the outcome and the impact of that sometimes until it's too late, right?
yes,
Until the costs are there and then it gets harder, it's more complex, it's more challenging, it's more stressful to attempt to resolve it. So this is what I've seen, and I'm going to throw over to you because I'd like to know, what you see in terms of generational friction in your own workplace and how if we do different, we can start to get a different outcome. But this is what I've seen from firsthand over 18 years out in the field when it comes to generational difference. And the first risk I'm seeing is that people just can't deliver on their role, right? They can't deliver on expectations because there is either roadblocks, people aren't giving them what they need, they can't have the conversations that are required. So we see that people are feeling frustrated and also hamstrung by being able to deliver on roles. And what we're seeing as an outcome of that is that we're starting to see people being disconnected, frustrated in their own role. They don't have a voice. And I know you mentioned that before in one of our conversations. We'll talk about that today. And
yeah,
ultimately, what is starting to happen is that when people are feeling that they can't do the role they're employed to do, and I've certainly been on projects in the past, that then leads to doubt, isolation, disengagement, and where does that ultimately lead? People don't tend to stay forever
yeah,
and they start to leave, right? So we've got
yeah,
issues around attrition, we've got issues around people's sense of well-being and sense of identity. And then we've also got, and something that I think people don't think about here, but that
mm,
you and I have spoken about and I've written about, is the reputation of the organisation too, right?
yes,
So we can't underestimate the fact that yes, this has got a commercial impact, particularly if you've got high levels of attrition, but also the generate, the employer brand. If
yeah,
that is not where it needs to be, yeah, if the reputation in the market is not positive,
totally,
then ultimately
totally
that
agree.
costs you too, right?
Yes,
In terms of, everyone wants to talk about attraction, how we do that.
yeah,
So I think there's many risks here that we can start to de-risk when we start to adopt a very different approach that we're talking about today to facilitate, not fear it. So my
Yes.
first question for you, Alan, you know these are coming. I might throw
I was hoping about it.
well, mate, yeah, I might throw some surprise ones in there
Yeah,
for you.
yeah,
But the first one is, you understand, and so we're going to unpack this for the people, but understanding the circular workplace and understanding, the ideas that we've spoken around about starting to come from a facilitation mindset around difference rather than avoidance and fearing. How do you think that this approach can be used when looking at some of the key organisational trends? What are you seeing in your part of the world, and how can we start to, bring that facilitation mindset to
yeah,
address and find genuine solutions to those trends?
yeah. Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Ali, for this opportunity, right?
Mm,
To share this to the world. Our what I call like wild ideas at first, and then it's becoming more and more bold ideas, I think. I saw on your post. And then yeah, why has become a very critical, I'm not saying in only important, but critical conversations, because most of the things that I saw around this topic is like just trying to put some stereotypes on the generations, right?
mm,
So
mm,
they're not actually giving real-time, so not real-time solution, applicable solutions
mm.
and how to deal with this, right? They just put some labels on the generations and then said, oh, this generation XYZ, and then
Yes.
everything else is like this, and then that's it. Maybe they told how to handle them, but how, I mean, like, did you discuss on how to bridge them, and then
Mm,
what are the impacts of that,
mm,
and then how to apply it, right? So saying that, yeah, when you're saying about the risk, this is something that you need to not you actually, we need to be very concerned of, right?
mm, mm.
Because when you're saying about risk, I really like the ones that you mentioned about the reputations of the corporate organizations
Yes.
if you're not managing this correctly, right? Again, this is not only the latest or the current generations of workforce coming in into the workforce, but it's also the ones that already been there for several decades,
Yes.
right? So even though like the first generation, the oldest generations that working in the workforce, and then they are retiring, and then they are going back to the world, to the non-corporate world, it still have some impacts to your organizations. Okay, because when they say that, are you sure you want to work there for candidates, right? If they say to the candidates like, are you sure do you want to work there? Because their company have so many young generation, you might not fit there because you're maybe in the like certain age that
Mm.
don't have the connection or the bridge to the younger, something like that, right? So it's not only the young or the
No.
youngest or the oldest one, right? It's all levels. And like you said, it's not only the employees and the employees, but also the peers and colleagues, right?
Yes.
Now going back to the circular workplace, why it's becoming a very important framework to bridge this and to give solution on this, especially the ones that you mentioned about facilitating, right? Because uh, in my area, as in the change management area, right, we have like facilitating, educating, and then persuasions, right? Something like that for the escalation of the conflict or managing the resistance.
Mm.
But yes, facilitating is the important part first because it's the one thing that have the most open and growth mindset in
Yes.
facilitating people, right? Because you are trying to bridge these several parties that working together, and instead you're trying to educate them because sometimes like people when they're trying to be educate like, are you sure you want to educate me? because I might know much more than you, something like that, right? So you go into a facilitating first, and then you try to understand what is happening with of these each generations, right? And then after that, after you facilitating it, then I really like the one phase in your circle workplace that mention about feedbacks and then debriefing, right?
Correct,
I
correct.
think
We're going to bring it
yeah,
up.
yeah, I
That's
think
right.
bring it up,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
With that, then you get the inputs there, and after that, you will know how to formulate the solution because again, you cannot just put generalization or stereotyping for each generation there.
Yeah.
Right? I met like younger generations working in the coming the workforce, and they've been like working even before they graduate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like they don't know about the workplace, they don't know about the challenge, they know. But
Mm-hmm.
just because of their age, they are treated it like a newcomer, like a fresh graduate. So it's
Yeah.
not going to work that way. You know what I
No,
mean?
no.
Yeah.
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 So can
So
I
that's
just
my take
say,
on this. Yeah.
so Albert, can I just
Yeah.
thank you for that? And I think this is a really important point around generational bias, right? We
Yeah.
all have it. And you and I talked about, prior to today,
Hmm.
that you and I have, I'm Generation X, I think. I don't know, be careful here what I reveal, but I'm Generation X, right? Yeah, I am, I think. I'm after the boomers, full disclosure. But I have lots of values and traits and
Yeah.
expectations around how I'm going to work that would be very, very similar to not even, was it Gen Zs, like, and certainly millennials and probably younger generations, right?
Hmm.
So I think, like we said, we're not one or the other. We are a blend, and everyone is individual and needs to be treated as such. And I think, too, it's going to be incredibly important as part of this discussion and ongoing that leaders and decision makers are very aware, because as I've said,
Hmm.
roles and workplace experiences
Yeah.
don't exist in a vacuum, that leaders are across what is happening from a broader perspective. Yeah. So understanding, bring your head up over that
Yeah.
parapet, understand
Yeah.
what's happening politically in your environment, in the world,
Yeah.
because it does influence all of us, what's happening socially, economically. Let's get real. We talk about a cost of living crisis here in Australia.
Yeah. Same here.
People are
Same here.
working. People are working until, so the boomers, that are in their 70s, they are
Yeah.
not retiring at 65, 67, which is
Yeah.
what it normally would have been here, right? So
Yeah.
they are working much later. And by law, if you're able to do the role, no one can say to you, hey, mate, you're out, right? So what we're saying is a lot of these, I don't like the term older, I like the term wiser, but
Hmm.
experienced generations are staying longer because also, too, people are healthier. 70-year-olds in Australia now are not like 70-year-olds even 20 years ago, right? So that's just a fact too, right? Like, so
Yeah.
because of medicine and lifestyle and health and whatever. So they're staying longer. And then in the meantime, we've got this constant supply of different generations coming in, right? So it has created a more complex, but also great opportunity if you know how to do different with it. So I'm encouraging leaders to not look at their workplace and their people in isolation, but you've got to look holistically. You've got to
Yeah.
understand what is happening in people's lives, what they desire, what they need, what they want, what those hopes, what those, the aspirations, the dreams, the goals, not just from an organizational perspective, but that individual piece. So generational bias, critically important that we're going to talk about this in a minute around how we challenge that respectfully and constructively just through how we work every day, right? Designing the environments, the conditions, the relationships to be able to do that. So what I'm
Yes.
going to do, and hopefully Zoom will play nice, I'm going to bring up the picture here. So bear with me. I'm going to bring up the diagram. There we are. Can you see that, Albert?
Yeah. I can see that.
You can see it? Okay, and if I make it any bigger, sometimes we lose it. So, but I will bring it up a little bit. Yeah, I'll bring it up a bit for the people.
There it is. Yeah.
Is that okay? All good? Yep.
All good.
So we've talked about, we don't have the whole time to talk about the whole approach today.
Yeah.
We do that elsewhere. So I encourage people to come back and look at that. But what we're talking about today is particularly part 3 of this, the debriefing component. Yeah?
Yeah.
And what happens after we build new strategies and we plan and we, undertake the skill development piece and, we're experimenting back in the workplace, which tends to happen into part 2. And from part two, we start to see lessons learned, things that we want to share. We'll talk about what's involved in the debrief. We also have mistakes, near misses. We have intel and insights, right? So I'm just going to go through some of the things we do, and then I'm going to throw over to you around how we can fulfill the gaps. And please, as I said, this is a conversation, so jump in, let me know. But what I was finding from time across projects, and it really never existed, and it's one of the reasons why I created it and why we're working on this, is that people like to jump from project to project, right? So they layer it, don't they, like a cake, right? Quickly, rush to the finish line. Don't even know what we're moving towards sometimes. Next project. And the experiences that we have, the intel, the lessons learned, the corporate memory is never captured at all, right? We don't capture the lessons learned. We don't do much with the wisdom, which we talk about later on elsewhere in part 4. But the debriefing element is critical. And the reason is that we have to, if we're going to really facilitate generational friction, we've got to do something different around how people connect every day, right? You always fear what you don't know. That's pretty simple human sort of trait, isn't it, right? Like you would know that in the change space, right? There's a lot of reasons why people resist it. But I've found from my own space in the L&D and OD space that a lot of it is that people just, they fear other people, but they actually fear their own capability to deal with it in a way that's constructive. Yeah, they do, right? So if we look at it, it's not that there's a lot of external factors, but a lot of the time it's like, what does this mean for me? And am I actually going to be able to deliver on what's required? So we've got to create the environments where, firstly, people are truly confident and capable in what they're doing. And this is not about throwing people in a space and saying, good luck, try and facilitate it. This is about proper skill set development and creating environments to be there. So, because people are like dogs, God love them. I love dogs, I've got Bella, but they smell fear, right? So if you're not confident in this, people are going to obviously pick up on that, right? They're going to sense it. So this is some of the key things that I've done out in the field, and then I'm going to throw over to you and want your input into what you're doing or what you think, what else we can do to reduce those gaps. But these are some real tactics that I've used that have worked. Now, it's important to point out, before we get to part 3 of this debrief, there's a few things that we've done that are quite critical to this work. So the first one is we've designed the roles accordingly. So the sharing of the wisdom, the lessons learned, what we're talking about coming up now is embedded in the roles across all roles, leaders, managers, team leaders, whatever your role is. This is actually an expectation and it's supported within the role. Okay, so people have helped co-create the role. They understand that. The other thing that we do as part of this is that we create the rules of enjoyment together. So we have agreed and set up the frameworks, but also the standards and conditions in which we're going to do this work together. So that's particularly important. We're not throwing people in the deep end here. We're not just trying to put generations together and hope it works. So prior to this point of debriefing, there has been mentoring, there's been some coaching, there's been discussions one-on-one with individual generations as well too, to start to lay the foundations down before we get to the debrief. So I just want to put that caveat in here because I know people will be like, oh, but what if you try and bring people together and it doesn't work? So there's a lot of homework and work that goes in before we get here. But the first one is getting to know one another and actually knowing one another beyond the role. So there might be some good ways that you do that. It can be sort of social. I'm not talking about sort of traditional necessarily team building, but it can be informal ways to come together and get to know each other outside of the workplace as well. And I feel that it's important that, as I said, you always fear what you don't know and you don't trust when you don't know people's motive and intent. So we've actually got to understand one another, Albert, as humans, right? Not just as the role. The role is just one part of us. Yeah.
Agree.
So the first thing is making space and time beyond the role to be able to do that. And as I said, it could be through, like I said, some sort of social engagement. It could be through some reverse mentoring, but it's something that we do that's creative that allows, it could be over a coffee, a conversation, but for people just to start to connect and have a different dialogue. The second thing is around the idea sessions. And this is really where we start to make that an ongoing part of the circular workplace, where the teams are coming together. And we are going to talk about the agenda in terms of the focus of that towards the end of this conversation. But those idea sessions are collective discussions and debrief that allows us to be able to rewire existing relationships, but also make space for new ones. See, this is what we've got to understand, right? From my experience, and I have worked in really complex environments where there are people of different generations and people within the same generations and teams that really don't like one another. There has been history. So for me, I have to be quite strategic and smart about how I'm going to bring them together. And so being able to create what is quite strategic and intentional, but feels quite normal and then quite organic is really important. And those idea sessions where the team come together with proper structure to talk about, you know, the areas we'll talk about in a minute, but, you know, outcomes and impacts, and it's got clear structure to it. It's not a free-for-all, right? It's not pointing fingers. It doesn't get out of control. It's got real structure and focus around it. That's been really, really critical to getting movement, not just on projects and people delivering at another level, but actually being able to be in the same room with one another too, right? So, you know, that ongoing idea sessions and the debriefing where we start to reflect, but generously, and I say generously, share knowledge. Yeah. And so we're doing certain things at this point, and I'm going to throw over to you there in a minute.
Yeah.
Around lessons learned. What did we learn when we had, you know, learned this new skill set and played with it out there? Lessons learned. Where do we make mistakes, right? Now, this is why this is not a quick thing. This happens over time as we get to understand each other's motive and intent, right? But the mistakes, right? Like, you don't learn from mistakes unless you put the action in afterwards. That's, you know, we say, oh, you learn from your mistakes. Well, I'm going to call BS on that, because you actually don't unless you have, the follow-up, the relationships, the support to do something with mistakes. Otherwise, they just stay as mistakes. So in the debrief, we're talking about mistakes. We're talking about near misses. We're talking about what I learned that can be valuable to someone else. What can I share with someone else? Not just me holding on to it. Knowledge and skill and insight has no value unless you're finding ways to share it with other people.
Yes.
And then we're looking at, you know, the solutions collectively. We'll talk more in a minute. I'm just giving a bit of a high level here to the people that are not necessarily familiar with the circular workplace.
Yeah.
And then those solutions, right, actually coming together and having to have that facilitated has been incredibly important, because people start to break down those roadblocks and start to help one another, sometimes without even knowing they're doing it, because it's just becomes a normal, everyday part of how we work. And of course, the wisdom in time, that compounding wisdom that we unpacked in part 4.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to throw over to you there around, you know, the fairness and the equity here, finding a voice for people. Critical.
Yeah.
Critical, right? We'll talk a bit more about that. But I'd be interested in your opinion. It's a question I wanted that we talked about before around, we have a lot of inequity and a lack of fairness in our organisations, largely, where a lot of the investment and skill development sits at that sort of leadership level, right? It's in the C-suite, and then it's like a funnel, right? It's all very top-heavy, and then it gets jammed, and nothing flows through to all the other people, all the other roles that require ongoing development and capability building too. So how can we use this model to reduce that brain gain and those, you know, reduce the risk that we've spoken about, but also address the matter of fairness and equity in our organisations when it comes to the development of people out? But what's your idea around that?
Okay. So this actually quite, I'm not going to say a trend, because it's actually already being discussed like almost a decade ago about fairness and equity, right?
Yeah.
But I'm glad that currently it has becoming to take more shapes, especially in Indonesia, with the big corporations here. But before going to that, I want to little bit travel back into the context, right? About before going into the fairness and equity part. So I really glad that you mentioned about job roles and expectations.
Mm,
Okay, because again, I think you also know that I mentioned several times that I'm not really a fan of generational labeling, right?
mm,
Why? Because it's there. Okay, it's easier for us to mention about certain generations. Yes, okay, but not about stereotyping generalizations. But because when you're coming into organizations or corporations or companies, everything else, and you have your job role, you have your job descriptions, right? I mean, proper companies or proper organizations will have that, and your job roles and your job descriptions might not care about which generation are you,
mm.
right? You're coming in, you thought you are going to fill up a job, then it doesn't say that.
Bless you.
I'm sorry. It doesn't say that you have to be this generation to fill
Mm,
up this job, right?
mm.
You might have some kind of age, I say a range, but I don't think again because of that it's like they're calling out discrimination on that, right?
Yes,
For
correct,
certain age,
correct.
right?
Very much so.
Yeah, so some job roles doesn't have that, doesn't have the age range, right? So you're
Right.
coming in, you want to fill a job roles, this is your job description. Organization might not care like which generation are you, as long
Mm,
as you can do it and you have result deliverables. And that brings us to the expectations, right? Like you mentioned, there are certain expectations there that have to be managed, whatever generation are you, right?
yeah.
And saying that, it brings me to this, what you call the fairness and equity. Why? Because to fulfill that role with the certain expectations, we have to provide, not provide actually, the ecosystems have
Mm,
to
mm.
support these activities, right? Either it's by giving a fair chance and I say giving the right tools uh, for all, not only for certain people or certain job roles, right? And this is where the fairness and the equation comes in. So why this has become more and more I say critical these days because you have the experiments there, right? In your second phase, right? Before you come into the debrief.
Mhm.
It's very I mean his whole full phase have to complement each other,
Yes, that's right.
right? And then because why? In experiments, you have the results. But the results is not only the good ones, you also have the bad ones, right? And then this, like you said, becoming the lesson learned. But lesson learned is useless if you're not going to follow up on it,
Correct,
right?
correct,
And going to follow up on it, you have to have the proper infrastructure,
correct.
the proper motivations, external, internals. And this is where the fairness and equity comes from. Because first, again, you have your job roles they have to fill up. You have your job description they have to fill up uh, to ensure that you perform there. And then, sorry, as a guideline for you to
Mhm.
perform there. And then you have to manage the expectation, not only expectation of your peers, your employees, but yourself also, right?
Yes, yes.
And then after that, you are experimenting in terms of like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this job, this the first way. Oh, I don't think it's like going to be efficient enough, so I'm going to do the second way, which is maybe more efficient but takes more resources. Again, experimenting is not it's not something that you can just how you say try it on a whim, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because experimenting is something that because you have your mentor there or your coach there, whatever you want to call them, but you are trying to manage expectation from yourself also. That's why you
Mm,
experiment on yourself also, right? You
mm,
develop yourself. You're trying to new skills, new competencies, something like that. And then after that, you learn something that's not working, then you're going to improve it. So this is where the debrief and the
correct.
facilitating comes in, right? Because it's not only about again, managing expectations is not only about managing others' expectations, but also yourself,
Yes.
right? That's why you need to do something about the lessons that you learn,
Yes.
because if not, it's like you say, it's useless. It's just going to be like a very nice document or very nice journal, maybe to post on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Saying that people will say, okay, so now you learn your lessons, then what?
Yeah.
Remember what I
Right.
said, then what, right?
So it's correct, right? So no,
Yeah,
thank
yeah,
you.
that's it.
No, it floats around, it doesn't land anywhere, right?
Yeah,
And so therefore the risk is of increasing the mistake again, because it can be, like you said, unless we put the structures and, as you said, the relationships, the tools, the resources, the space, the time, and make systemic changes, we are very
yes,
much at risk of repeating that mistake and
yeah,
those that are new as well. And I also think too, if I can just say before we sort of move on to some of those other actions in detail around, we've got to stop fearing mistakes.
yeah,
Like, people want innovation and they want creativity and they talk about it, but they actually don't create environments that acknowledges and makes space to do something useful with mistakes, to make
yeah,
space to talk about gaps and threats and risk. And anyone who follows me knows that I've done a lot of work in really changing how we look and utilize that. And I
yeah,
think that is absolutely critical, not just to commercial opportunity, but to people's well-being.
yeah,
Think about what type of workplaces, Albert, we can create when we can leverage and repurpose those mistakes into something that is different, that has more durable outcome, that has life in it. People can breathe. They don't look over their shoulder every day thinking, I'm going to get caught out and go, what if someone finds it out and what's it going to mean? The anxiety, the pressure, the stress. We actually make space to say, okay, like you said, don't want to keep repeating it, but let's say, how do we take that? Where do we actually use it to benefit the whole organisation, each other, and not just yourself? And I think for me, you make a great point around those idea sessions that happen in the debrief, specific actions,
yes,
genuine discussion where the leader is helping not give all the answers, but acting as the facilitator for the people to find their own solutions and to share those together, right? The idea section has a real proper structure to it. Like, it can go sort of, it can be fluid where it needs to, but not to the point where you lose the point of even coming together, right? So that's the beauty of having discipline, knowing
mm,
when to move on something, but having that structure as well. So I want to just come back to this as we sort of move into our last part, is that we're actively providing, when we're doing that debrief, looking at mistakes, near misses, and lessons learned, that the team is actually working together.
yeah,
It's expectation, again, that people will support one another in finding solutions. Yeah.
yes,
So not leaving people to actually struggle, right? Making time for people to honestly think about it,
yeah,
but then move forward and understanding what those solutions are. And you make a good point, making sure that we're valuing challenges, that we're actually sharing the insights from
yes,
the insights that have come from using those skills in part two. Yeah. And sharing it,
definitely.
because at the end of the
Agree.
day, there's so much crossover in what we do that there are valuable resources and insights that we gain from that. So making sure that we can do that. And like you said, unpacking the problems. Talk about resilience a lot in organisations, but not doing the actions that actually build resilience yet. I
Yeah,
don't want to see resilience again, Albert. It's just, I think I'm becoming numb to it almost, right? I think I'm becoming almost numb to it because
yeah,
it
yeah,
means nothing.
yeah,
And the way you get resilient is by, showing up, talking about things, knowing that you're not going to be thrown under the bus, so to speak, getting comfortable and at least familiar with it.
mm,
That's how we're going to build resilience. So, as I said, and one thing I want to say around the debrief idea sessions is that it's not a feedback session, it's an advice session.
Yes.
And feedback and advice are very different. So, I'd be interested in what you're thinking around that. But for me, feedback often is useless because of the fact that it tends to sit in the past. A lot of it's personal opinion. It's not particularly helpful. But when we come from an advice perspective and people come to these knowing that it's an advice mindset, what I've seen is that people think about the valuable intel that they're giving to others. It's more forward thinking in its approach. It's got more depth and more context around it as well. So for me, and I'll throw this in the mix, but I've been talking about it a lot in other work this week, that we're starting to see a shift from feedback, traditional sort of feedback, which can leave people walking away feeling not particularly empowered or emboldened to do different. But the advice piece it builds a different skill set in people, not just those giving it, but those receiving it. And that's particularly important. And what we're doing in those debrief sessions too is that we're reshaping the roles and how the project's being delivered in real time based on the intel that we share. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the final point I want to make around, just the focus of these idea sessions, and it comes off your point, I'm going to throw over to you. You raised it in our pre-briefing as well, that these debriefs bring so much intel and build ongoing capability just through the ways in which they're designed and the areas that they support people in. But there was one area that I hadn't added that you discussed, and it's really valuable, and that's around using debrief sessions to help with the decision-making process. So decisions that, as you said, have long-term impact and outcome. Yeah. And ones that don't just affect how people show up and deliver roles and projects, but that affect the commercial bottom line as well too. So when we're looking at the circular workplace, we are looking at outcomes that are and impacts that are both people and commercial related.
Yes.
At the same time, because they have to be, right? And
have to be.
I think that's been something that we've failed at in HR and L&D, is that people have always sort of adopted a mindset that it's one or the other. It's all about the people, and therefore you're not thinking about commercial, or you're all about commercial and profit, you don't care about the people. Here, it's always been a blend of both. So when we're talking about the type of decisions that we want to be able to, think about here, is we're thinking about not just, the type of decision, but when do we make decisions? How do we make them? Who makes them? Yeah. And how do we measure the outcome and the impact, right? So this really, I see the debrief, as I said, of certainly not just valuing the corporate memory from what has gone, but as you said, really having genuine structure and skill to be able to move forward, and decisions are critical to that. And involving those of different generations in that process, in those key areas that, like I said, you kindly shared with me at another time. And so I've talked a lot. I'm going to be quiet for a minute. I've been talking all morning.
I'm glad that you are trying to unpack this.
I know. I can't unpack it all. I'm focusing, as you can see, there's a lot to it. But the debrief piece, I want to make sure people leave, really thinking, as I said, there's many elements to it, but really honing in on that debrief piece as a way of doing something useful and different with that generational friction. So when you think about, we'll just talk about the debrief element and the key components within it.
Yeah.
What are some of those impacts and outcomes that we can get? Yeah. If we start to rewire intrinsically the way in which we connect to one another and the type of dialogue that we're having, right? So the connection, the dialogue, follow-up, delivery. What can be different in your opinion, Albert? What outcomes and impacts will we start to see from not just team, but a broader organisational perspective?
Okay. Let me arrange my wild thoughts first.
Go, do that. There's a lot there. Gather your wits.
There's a lot of things.
Everyone relax. Take a breather. Take a breather.
So the first thing is like when you mention about feedback and advice, right? And yes, I think in debriefing it goes beyond just feedbacks. It's
Mm,
also included the advice aspects there, right? I mean, I know that especially people in LinkedIn uh cur- currently like flooded with coaching and coaches of
mm,
LinkedIn and everything else, right? And then some of them mentioning coaching is not mentoring, right?
that's
Okay,
right.
I agree.
Mm,
It's two different things. But at some point in your oh sorry, at some level in your career, why can't you be both,
yes, yes,
right?
you need to
You
be.
be yeah,
Mm,
you need to be both at sometimes,
mm,
right?
mm,
But you just need to know that uh which hat they're going to use. But here in the brief, you have to be both, right?
yes,
You are trying to facilitating and then you are trying to find out what's happening, what's wrong with the previous experiments, with the previous things, and then you try to give them the advice because I think you also put it there, right?
mm,
You reflect on what's been, and that's like the feedback part and the coaching part, and how. The how part is
mm,
also important, right?
mm.
Because it's the
That's
critical
right.
why. Yeah, it's
Yes,
because
yes.
and then you give advice, right?
Mm,
But again, this advice is not telling them what to do, you know, but it's like, hey, no, this is probably a better way to do it.
mm-hmm,
And then you're telling them like, and you know what? Let's do it together.
mm,
That's the important part, right? Because that way you can manage expectation. Again, like I mentioned, you can manage expectation for yourself and for others because you are doing it together. It's got
yes,
collaboration, everything else, right?
yes.
And then it's the one thing that creates, like you said, the favorite word, resilience. It's creating the resilience. Why? Because the trust is there.
Mm,
And then you are trying to bond with each other, maybe even not let it to work, but let it, sorry, not let it to the same work, but maybe in the whole environment of this same project, right?
mm, mm,
Maybe it's two different projects, but with similar silver linings within projects or similar problems within projects. It happens, right? So that's one. Why in this debrief part, you have to go not only on the feedback, like you said, but only also to the advising part and
yes.
facilitating, right? Now, going back a little bit about the facilitating part, I have this conversation about pre-COVID. I'm not sure about how many years ago. I just say pre-COVID,
Yeah.
right? Because it has been talked between the word in the environment of academics, right? Because I used to be a lecturer also,
Mm-hmm.
and then there are sayings, not that there are discussions around it, saying that in the future it is probable that lecturer will become like more than 50%. They will become facilitator. So maybe only 40%
Yeah.
lecturer,
Mm-hmm.
60% facilitator. Why? Because all the materials already there. Like, and it's happening. Now you can ask your best friend Google or your best friends in AI, right? About some textbooks materials if it's
Mm-hmm.
like in the public area, right? Public domain. But your lecturer has to become also a facilitator because all the materials are already there. And if you bring it to the organizations or to the workforce part, all the materials already there. Because why? Because they are also already like the previous workforce there. You know, they're already there, they already have the knowledge. And then how to divest or to distribute this knowledge into the lower, not lower, the
Yeah.
younger generations,
Yes.
but also how to maintain them, right? Remember, I think we also discussed about brain drain previously,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Not only distributing it, but maintaining it is also a critical thing. And
Correct.
then to avoid the risk. And this brings us to the links between, yes, you can put your mindset on this, you can focus on your people to retain the knowledge, also to retain the people, but it also have to have a positive impact to your profit. And this
Yes.
is where the commercialization comes in, right? Because like, so you have done the debriefing
Mhm.
and you know what you're going to do with it. But then you have to take a look, step back, and then take a look again. What are your organization's goals are,
Yes. Yes.
right? Because if you're doing something for the sake of just maintaining the people or the employees or retaining them, and then to stop the brain drain, but it's
Yes.
not linked up to your organization's
That's right.
goals, then it won't be sustainable, right? I mean, your leadership, your finance, your CFO will say that, okay, I'm glad you're doing this, but what's the impact to our organization,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this is something that, again, goes for sure, goes way more beyond resilience,
Yes. Oh, very
but
much so.
how you can become resilience with impact and then becoming persistence with the right consistency.
That's a really good point. So the
Yeah.
discipline, the consistency part.
Yeah.
Can I just come back to something you've said before we
Yeah.
sort of do a final wrap up and talk about where to from here? I
Yeah.
just want to say you make a really good point around linking, which this does, the role and project delivery into the
Yeah.
departmental plans and then ultimately into the overarching strategic goals and outcomes, right?
Yes.
And when we talk about, there's been a lot of, I think Gallup have done a lot of research, a lot of organisations have done a lot of research around disconnect, right, between
Mm.
people and disengagement and role to the bigger picture. Well, because we're not connecting in this way, right?
Yeah.
So when we're having these idea sessions, we are, as part of that, always, and I know we talk about mapping, but mapping what we're deciding within these idea sessions back to those specific
Yeah.
project,
Yeah. Specific
departmental,
goals.
yeah,
Yeah.
and organizational goals as the guide, as the map. So you never can forget it because it's always there. It's always part of the discussion. It's always part of the plan. It's always shaping the decisions moving forward. And we always come back. That's the compass. And that's always been a critical part of this approach and why it's worked, I think, is because it allows people to connect those strategic dots
Yeah.
and make sense of it for themselves. And I think it's important to note that this is an approach where the outcomes and the impacts are owned by the people, not me or you as the experts or the creators of it. And I think people have to own it and make sense of it. And I think your point, and I've just made a note about that because I want to highlight it, is that we have to be joining those dots across all 3-4 levels of
Yes.
delivery. And when we can do that and facilitate that, then it just allows us to not only be focused, but make smarter decisions around the investment, both
Yeah.
financially, but from human capital and energy and time and available resourcing around it. Otherwise, we do fly
Yeah.
blind. So that's a great point. I'm really glad you brought that up, Albert. This is not the last discussion we're going to have around this.
For
We're
sure.
talking
For
today
sure.
about, starting to get people to think differently
Yeah.
around generational friction. So we are really in the last 5 minutes of our hour-long discussion, which
Ah,
is time.
okay.
I know, Albert. Time
Yeah.
flies when you're having fun, huh?
Yeah. I just
But
realized that.
no,
Okay.
it has. It's been, as I said, it's a big one, and we don't want to. As I said, I think we've given a lot of people genuine food for thought and ways to be able to start to reflect and on own work practice and move forward on it. So
Yeah.
I think for you and I, if there's any final comments that you want to make, let's do that. I think if people want to, pardon me, follow us, we're both on LinkedIn often, quite a lot, creating original content and bringing proven but different perspectives. So, I'd be encouraging people to follow us, to sign up, to our newsletter and to your work. Is there any final points? Because as I said, we are going to continue to have these discussions, continue to educate, continue to bring different perspectives, engage the community in these proven but not obvious discussions a lot of the time. any final comments you want to leave us on before we leave for today? But we'll be back. We'll be back.
Yeah, we'll be back. So for this episode, only for this episode, I have
Yes.
I think the final comment from me is like, okay, stop labeling generations
Yes.
and start bridging them,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then uh find how to manage the expectation from all sides,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then with, like you said, with the fairness and the equity in mind, that's related to the business impact.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's all.
Mm. Yeah, no, and I think too,
Yeah.
if I can just say thank you for that. I think
Mm.
even beyond management, we need to start influencing it, right? So
Yes.
that is, like I said, a very different, whole other skill set. But part of the facilitation is influencing how people think, feel, act, language they use, how they perceive themselves and
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would like to say, moving forward, when we, taking this work to the world, is that we're not just merely managing. We're going to really influence it. Yeah, we're going to
Yeah.
shape it. We're going to bring it from one point to the next as well.
Yeah.
And I like how you really framed it up, that this is, like you said, stop labeling, be curious, and the bridges have to be built, but they must be done intentionally. They cannot be left to
Yeah.
chance, and we cannot
Yeah.
ignore them. And that is what is
Yeah.
happening, right? People are overwhelmed. They are just thinking, I don't know how to move through it. We are saying, we will show you. We will work with you to give you those resources, so it becomes part of the DNA of the organisation. It's not a once-off. This is for you to own it, understand it at a deeper level, so that it
Yes.
becomes, as I said, an ongoing, normal part that you own, and build and reshape in time as you need to. But that it's intrinsic parts are there for you to benefit from ongoing well after we've left the building. That is the valuable benefit of durable learning and development, and that
Yes.
is not a traditional approach. So this has been fantastic. I'm so excited to have you here. I'm always grateful for your intel and your input into what I'm creating, but also what you're helping create here as well. And so I look forward to continuing to build on this, and thank everyone who's joined us and will come back, and
Yeah.
who really doesn't want to fear it, but wants to facilitate that generational difference. So thanks everyone for being here,
Take
and
care all.
look forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, of course. Right.
Thanks.